Hello friends, it's Kat from Meow Kapow. To me, white pens are an essential member of my doodle team. They're great for making precise highlights over a number of media, making corrections in your writing, and cleaning up the edges of a piece if your masking tape didn't quite do its job. But I've had problems in the past, specifically because I discovered that my preferred white pen, the Uniball Signo Angelic, would reactivate Sennelier's Opera Rose paint and become pink instead of white. To test out these 11 pens, all of which are listed in the doobly-doo, I pulled out one of my B-paper watercolor journals and made a grid with the things I wanted to test these pens over. We're trying them on top of that Sennelier paint I mentioned, on pure black ink, Prismacolor colored pencils, black gouache, other random watercolors, and Daniel Smith's Opera Rose as well to see if that reactivation thing is unique to Sennelier. I also almost forgot my 11th pen, the Sakura Jelly Roll, so it had to be squeezed in at the bottom. That's fine though. Many of us are familiar with the Jelly Roll, so there shouldn't be many surprises there. There's a separate notebook you'll see as well that has thin paper in it to see if there is any weird oiliness or bleed through and to check waterproofness at the end. To walk you through what's happening here with the first pen, this is a Pilot Juice, which comes in a pack of 5 for $10. One interesting feature of it is that it's a click pen, so you don't have to worry about losing the cap. There are 2 tests being performed on the black ink swatch. We're testing to see the opacity of a single line with each pen, as well as to see if you can layer the pen well on top of itself without getting a weird texture, and while still adding opacity. The Prismacolor test is a little bit difficult on this paper, and that's totally my fault because I'm using a cold-pressed watercolor paper that's got a lot of texture, and for some of the pens it's difficult to see if they've had any effect. We'll just say that's an added layer of difficulty to the testing and move on. For the book with the blue numbered circles, I'm filling in the numbers with the pen to see if they bleed through the back at all, and there will be a waterproof test at the end. For everything else, we're just simply trying to see if they reactivate or don't layer onto these other mediums, like the gouache. This second pen is from a company called Art and Fly. I'd never heard of them before, but their name sounded kind of chintzy, and I assumed their pens would be a joke. Surprisingly, this pen is actually really nice. It came in a pack of 3 for $9, so at $3 a pen, they're not exactly cheap, but they're not exactly expensive either. It has a very thin, bright white line, and while it didn't layer over itself very well, it did layer over everything else nicely, so I was really surprised at its performance. Pen number 3 is the Uniball Impact, which are 1 pen for $4. Mostly, I knew what to expect from this pen since I use the Angelic version quite often, and the only difference I can tell between the Impact and the Angelic is that it has a slightly wider line. I suppose that could have been inferred from its name, though. Unsurprisingly, it reactivated with that pesky Sennelier paint, just like its Angelic sibling, but excelled in every other test. Pen 4 is the Uniball Signo Angelic, of which you can get 5 pens for $8. Up to this point, they've been my primary white pen, and my favorite aside from using with that one specific color we've been testing. They're being tested here because they're my current standard, but I'm hoping to find a single pen to use no matter what medium or color I'm working with. I mostly like that their ink usually flows really well, and they're a very vivid, bright white. Both Uniball pens, by the way, ended up not being waterproof. I suspect that the ink they use is somehow similar to gouache in some way, so if this is a feature you do or don't want in your pens, now you know. Pen 5 is the Sakura Decorace, which is $5 per pen. I'd never used one of these before and wasn't expecting much from it given my experience with the Sakura Jelly Roll, but I was definitely surprised by it. The ink comes from this pen very readily and is also very opaque white. It layered on top of everything super visibly, including the Prismacolor pencils. The Jelly Roll pens usually have a much more delicate and transparent ink, so this was a super cool find. Because of how quickly the ink flows from the tip of the pen, I did feel like it was a bit difficult to accurately place down lines, but that's definitely something easy enough to adjust to. Most other pens make you scribble a little bit to get them working, so having a pen that lets you use it easily from the first stroke really isn't a problem at all. The 6th pen is the Uchida Reminisce, which was 1 pen for $4. On its packaging, it proudly stated that it was archival quality and that it has a super comfort grip. The grip was nice, alright, but the pen mostly wasn't. It failed the Sennelier Opera test and the layering test and was otherwise fine enough in the other tests. Also, this pen ended up not being waterproof, if that's important to you. Pen 7 is this weird, giant Faber-Castell thing, coming in at 1 pen for $5. I didn't really know what to expect from it, and as long as you're okay with a really chunky nib to work with, it's actually pretty decent. One weird thing about it, though, is that it doesn't really seem to get any more opaque when you layer it, but I guess that means it's the ultimate in consistency? Eighth up to bat is an oil-based Sharpie, which costs $5 for one. I'll save you some trouble and just say it's definitely not best suited for use in the ways that I've been demonstrating. It barely has any white pigment to it at all on paper, but I've used it before on non-porous surfaces and it works great there. Pen 9 is an old friend, by which I mean old foe. I used to use the Sakura pen touch in high school and hated it then, but couldn't remember why. Today, I remembered. The ink flows super inconsistently, and you pretty much have to build up a pile of it somewhere and use that to dip the pen in because it refuses to write properly otherwise. At $5 per single pen, despite the fact that it technically passed most of the tests, I would not recommend this pen. Oh, by the way, it was the only one that sort of bled through the thin paper, by which I mean it left some weird kind of oil stain that bled through the other side. Again, really not into this pen, and it's the only one I would definitely say stay away from. 10th up is this Pasca ultrafine pen, which costs $7. I've seen these pens all over the place, but never got to use one myself, so I was curious. While the other two pens that needed to be shaken and pressed to work were not super great, this one was easy to use, flowed well, and had visible coverage on all mediums. It's not the brightest white, but it certainly gets the job done. Like the Faber-Castell pen, this also doesn't seem to get more pigment buildup when layering, but again, that just means consistency. Our last pen is one that a lot of people have at least heard of, the Sakura Jelly Roll. I stopped using this pen as my primary white because while it is reliable in its coverage and flow and can eventually be built up to work more opaquely, it starts out very light. I've never been satisfied with the coverage its ink provides and kept finding myself going over and over and over every time I wanted a brighter highlight or something, so while they are definitely smooth and usable pens, I'd only recommend these for someone who prefers something a bit more subtle. Now that we've got all the pens down on this thin paper, I tested out their water resistance by just smearing a water brush over them. The only ones that budged at all were the two Uniball pens and the Uchida Reminisce, which I already mentioned. Not being waterproof isn't necessarily a flaw, because it does mean that if you mess up, you can always wipe it away and start over again. This is more just to fully understand the capabilities of the pens, really. Looking back at the tests, pretty much every pen did well in almost every category, so it really comes down to opacity and whether or not they reactivated with that Sennelier Opera Rose. For the record, the pens that failed the Sennelier test were the Pilot Juice, both of the Uniball pens, the Uchida Reminisce, and the oil-based Sharpie. Of the remaining pens, there were 3 that stood out to me as overall best coverage and flexibility of use. The first surprise was that Art and Fly pen, which I really didn't expect much from, but actually performed quite nicely. Because they come in a pack of 3, it's easy for me to just stash one in my travel kit, leave one at home, and throw the third in a bag or something without worrying about not having access. Very cool. I was also really delighted by the Sakura Decoris pen, which I would say had one of the most vibrant and smooth inks I've ever tried. You can't really tell from the footage, but if you look at it up close in person, it dries slightly raised from the surface of your paper and has a slight glossy sheen to it. I have no idea what it's made of, but I like it. And last up, there's a reason people keep talking about Pasca pens. While it doesn't really get to the brightest white out there, it's really smooth to use, and I like that it has quite a bit of reliability in both its flow and its opacity. There's also bonus points given that I've seen people use these on multiple non-paper surfaces, so I suspect it has much greater potential than what I'll be using it for. What do you think? Which one of these would you like to try? Do you have a favorite white pen already? Let us know in the comments. And of course, please consider subscribing if you want to support this channel. Until I see you next time, I wish you peace, love, and shimmering highlights. Bye!